Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session, which is hosted by the Nature Friendly Farming Network. I'm Helen Chesshire from the Woodland Trust, and I'm going to chair this session. So I'm delighted to introduce three farmers who are going to talk about their practical experiences of trying to reach net zero with the aim of sub-zero in terms of farming for carbon. So they've got lots of experiences and the challenges and the goods and the bad, the good bits and the bad bits. So with no further ado, as long as we've got the assistant to the left, I'll introduce you to Craig Livingstone from Lockley Farm Estate in Hampshire, which has about 1,000 hectares of arable, sheep and commercial forestry. So over to you, Craig.
Cool. Can you hear me? Yeah, cool. I'll stand up so I can see my slides. And that's it. So, yeah, thanks for inviting me to be here today, Martin, and join in the conversation. It's my first time at Groundswell. I've really enjoyed it so far. So it's nice to just come and share with what we're doing at Lockley. So we're certainly not trying to be first, or we're certainly not in front in any way. We're just sort of trying to walk the talk, and a lot of what we're hearing and reading and all the other things we're trying to put into practice, but very much from a credible perspective, which says that it's got to be more than just an anecdotal feeling, that it feels about right. It's got to have some numbers around it that either nudges other people into moving towards this way and also convince us that we can keep running a business like it as well. So next slide, please. So I think it's far wider than just net zero, as much as that's the topic of today. It's revocation of products, it's trade, farmland bird decline, land use, soil health, biodiversity emergency, national food strategy, changing diets, all this stuff is almost off the top of your head. If we can address focus on one thing, we may come off the chessboard and leave ourselves vulnerable. If we can cover a lot of this in the same time, we can pull lots of the benefits which will move us towards being net or sub-zero. So the 5 regen ag principles, which I'm sure we all know about from reading Dirt to Soil and Christine Nichols and Elaine Ingham and all the other podcasts and books that are out there. We're very much working with these 5 regenerative agriculture principles, and that's really enabled us to bring us into a place where we are seeing the benefits of change, and we're seeing that on our carbon budgets, we're seeing that in the field, we're seeing that in terms of yield, in terms of input, and just visually by seeing it in the fields and on the farm and our whole practice. So we've actually got 2 businesses, Lockley Estate and another one, Preston Farms, have just come together. But this is an example in 2015 of the whole sort of 1,350 hectares of arable. It was, as you can see, a 3-crop rotation. And I pretty much imagine, this is before I arrived, and the reason there was some spring oats was probably because we had some failed rape. Fast forward 5 years, that diversity has increased significantly. And that doesn't include a 30-hectare rewilding area, which we started 12 months ago. We've now got some veg and a polytunnel. We've got a significant higher tier application in at the moment, which we're hoping to be approved in the next few months. And that will see, on average, across the 2 businesses, a 17.5% land use change away from arable farming, moving towards other use of our land. And that's going to enable us to change and become net and sub-zero. So again, like I said, I'm kind of, as much as the feeling of doing the right thing is good, we're brand new to this. I probably didn't know what sequestration was 6 years ago. I definitely couldn't spell it. But now every time you look, you can't move away from different words, different terminology, and a different language. So as we're weaning ourselves off an old traditional way of solving problems out the can and the bag, we're kind of learning this as we go. We haven't got it right all the time. We've got 1,200 sheep on the farm in partnership with the local shepherd, and we have cost ourselves an additional cultivation. We have left sheep in fields too long. We've left too much residue, and it's caused us issues with the drill. So we definitely haven't got it all right. But after 6 years, we're really, really starting to see the benefit. We feel it's better, and actually our numbers are starting to show that as well. But I think that kind of idea of trying something different is important. I don't think I go as far as accepting failure, because we can't afford failure, but we can certainly afford the ability to try something different. So the numbers on this chart aren't overly relevant. It's more to just give an example that we're doing the maths. So I go out there with the Quadrat, I take a measurement, I send off a fresh weight sample, I measure what the fresh weight is, send off a tissue sample, work out what the carbon-nitrogen ratio is, understand what my pence per kilogram of NPK is, and then at the very bottom you can see what we're capturing. Now, I'll leave the science bit to the scientists, but I know that we are, on our spring barley, for example, putting on just under 30% less nitrogen, and we're far more consistent in our tiller count, in our tiller retention. We definitely haven't had land dry out as much. We don't rely on glyphosate, so we're thinking about life after glyphosate, possibly one day. We're using sheep, we're integrating livestock, and I feel that the numbers are with us at the moment. This is just, again, I was 5 years as an agronomist, and everything I looked at was from the bottom of the root, from the base of the plant up, and it started with eye spot, and it went through to fusarium as the season went on. I didn't really consider soil. I went to university. I don't really remember a huge input on soil. We talked about the physical and chemical parts. We definitely didn't talk about biology. So this has been like a candle flickering for me. It's kind of reignited excitement in the job, totally learning a different language. And this is just an example of looking at things differently. We're trying to observe to do nothing and give us confidence to sort of not do something. So because it's topical, we always talk about wheat fungicides. So for example, in the crops I inherited from the 15-year, it was high yield barn bust type crops which needed high inputs. This season, using our predicted 5-year wheat average, we're producing crops for £62 a tonne's worth of fungicide. £62 per hectare, of wheat fungicides. It's not really about the fungicides. I'm not totally disinterested in that, if I'm honest, but it shows the confidence that we're building to do less and less. And I know I've spoken to people here today who aren't using any fungicides at all, and there'll be people in front of us. But on our scale, I can't just be that brave to say we're going to stop. So over 5 years, that's nearly 50% reduction. Our pesticide spend has reduced by 41% in 5 years. We're using 32% less fertilizer. We can confidently say we are building our soil organic matter with this new system. I'd say that these results that we took this year were a spike high, which I would like to do it for the next couple of 3 years before I ever think about trading carbon. I'd really like to understand the consistency of what we're doing. But I'll learn at the sharp pointy end of being a farmer what I can do to solve the problem, and then the carbon market can develop from there. So if we're going to be honest about it, on our estate, we're already net zero, sub-zero. We're net sequesters, but we're blessed with just on Lockley Estate, 235 hectares of woodland, 20 kilometres of hedges, 6 metre margins in every field. We got the assist project on any field that runs over 40 hectares. We split up every 120 metres. We split up with a biodiversity strip. So we could say, job, box ticked, we're net zero. But actually, if you look at our carbon budget, the biggest offenders are 60+ thousand litres of red diesel, 270-something tonnes of fertiliser, and that's come down significantly. So what are we doing? We have moved towards significantly reduced our tillage, and we introduced the zero-till drill for the first time within 6 years. We have got a trial with fuel. We're using Green D HVO fuel. We're using different alternatives with the fertilisers, so things like fiberphos, bringing in compost, muck for straw deals, all of those things we can do at the sharp pointy end on farm to try and get on top of it. And just to sum up, it's a little bit of, I'm not going to wait for someone to do this for us. I'm not going to wait for market creation. We're going to disrupt this. We'll create our own market. This isn't going to happen for us. I think it'll be totally led by farmers. We have got 250 plus deer run through our farm, which we now turn a pest to a profit. We're the first farm to have the small robot company actively working. We've got a new veg shed, we've got our English longhorns, mill our own flour, and we're good at producing food as well. So I'm totally passionate that we can do all of it on farm, and nothing has to suffer if we just change our mindset.
Thank you very much, Craig. I'm sure that's given you all lots of food for thought. So hang on to those questions, because we're no longer on Zoom, where you can save them in chat. So now I'd like to introduce Andrew Barbour, who's from completely the opposite end of the country, come all the way down from Scotland. He's farms at over 1,000 feet, and he combines beef, sheep, and woodland. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Woodland Trust and the Nature Friendly Farming Network, Alison, for getting me here. You may have noticed, it really doesn't matter where you get your news from. You could be forgiven for thinking that the only thing we have to do in the countryside to combat the climate challenge and the biodiversity challenge is to plant trees. And yes, trees are definitely part of the solution. Helen is relieved to hear me say that. But it's a gross oversimplification, and it's an insult to the service that grasslands and the potential role that grasslands, heathlands, and other open ground habitats can play. And this subject, wood pasture, bridges these two. So this is what I want to talk about, is our experience of this. It is, of course, the oldest form of land use integration between these two subjects, these two areas. And it ticks two key boxes: integration, and you can't move for that word appearing in policy documents, and resilience. And we've been hearing today about how diverse systems are much more resilient. This ticks these boxes. Our farming career, my wife Shaunak, who's here with me, our farming career started some 30 years ago, as you can probably tell looking at me. You could easily say that we were farming alongside trees then. The trees and the animals were supposed to stay apart, and there was fences in between. 10 years later, when we were reviewing our production methods, if you like, our approach to production, and we were considering how to get new woodland onto the farm, we really changed our mindset, and we started to see that there could be strong advantage for us in planning our woodlands so we could get the animals into those woodlands. So that was a big change in mindset for us, and through the early 2000s, we started to put this into practice. On this farm, I know it's upland, but some of the lessons and things we've learned, I hope, might be applicable to you. So I just want to explore those. Forget the upper hill zone, not allowed to plant trees on there for nature conservation reasons, so ignore that. The two areas of interest, the lower rough grazings, which for us would be called the marginal ground. Every farm has marginal ground. The context is different, but you think of it as marginal ground. And that middle cropping ground, that's the engine of the farm for us. We took two different approaches on these two different types of ground. Next slide, please. As we started to look at these, we were really trying to take a strategic view as to how we needed and wanted to use that ground. So you've got this lower rough grazings, already had some woodland on it. And we took the view, given how we were using it, sheep in winter and spring, that a wood pasture system run on that whole area could really meet our objectives. And our objectives at that time were shelter for stock, early spring grass, because at this altitude, spring grass is the real limiting factor for us. We were also interested in timber production as a diversification, and we were also interested in carbon, though we had no idea. It was very much at the bottom of the list. We had no idea what our needs were, how it would benefit us. So looking at this area, we decided to bring it up to a 50% woodland overall cover using wood pasture as the model. And we did it in small blocks we felt were likely to aid animal management and help the wildlife side of things to do. So we did 4 blocks. By 2009, we'd done 4 blocks, 3 with a grant aid, where the stock were excluded during the establishment phase, and 1 where we used an electric wire, hot wire, to keep the cattle out, used trees and tubes to let the sheep through. And so, some years later, looking at the middle ground, next slide, please. Yes, on that one. And looking again at how we're using that ground, large-scale wood pasture was just not compatible with our needs to produce the winter feed and how we were using it for sheep. So we started to do the field margin thing. You'll be well familiar with that. But we'd had success in that non-grant-aided electric fence tubes-only approach against all the expectations, it has to be said. So we started using that approach around the field margins, using small groups. And so that's the experience I want to talk about today. Next slide, please. And as we looked at this, these were the questions that came into our minds as to how to design this wood pasture aspect. And the first thing, obviously, canopy type. We were looking for trees with light canopy to let the light through to keep the grass growing. And for us, that meant birch. But for you, it would also mean willow and poplars and all these other different species. We did not want heavy shade-bearing trees. That cut out the conifers, or with the possible exception of Scots pine, which you can grow with birch. But it certainly cut out the spruces. And it would also mean that sycamore wasn't, for instance, going to be a main choice species. But we also realized that coppicing ability would be really useful. I should have said, what is pasture wood? Because pasture wood, as opposed to a grazed woodland, is a wood combining these three components of grass or heathland, trees, and animals in significant quantities. And what makes it different from just a grazed woodland is that you are thinking, the manager is thinking about the regenerative needs and the management potential of all these three components, because in a grazed woodland, the trees are ignored, and that is common experience across, I'm sure, the whole of the UK, certainly Scotland. So bearing in mind that those regenerative needs, coppicing ability seemed to me, or discussing this together, certainly important, and also end use. So the end use, we were looking at oak in particular as useful, and good coppicing ability, aiming for a short log and firewood. These were the things we were looking at then. I would strongly argue that you go through that same sort of process. Nowadays, I think we would include wood chip for into the cattle courts as an interesting end use to go back onto the land. Next slide, please. Planting patterns, we went for strips or alleys or groups, and we were aiming for a 60% canopy cover. The rules of the grant scheme allowed us to do that. That was the minimum we could do. On now some 15 years or so, we would say that's probably the upper level. We would sit somewhere, if we were doing it again, between 40 and 60%. It's interesting, the Swedes, who have a lot of experience of this, think anything over 30% is wood pasture. So maybe it's somewhere in this middle area that is an appropriate kind of mix. And of course, with the coppicing, as you thin to try and maintain that canopy cover, coppicing ability is useful. Next slide, please. And of course, protection is the big one. We went for stock exclusion on the grant-aided ones. We pretty much had to. So we used short hedging products. That has the ability of giving you an early stable tree. So in those blocks, we got the sheep back in 5 years, after 5 years, cattle after 9. And this is yield class 6 for those of you who are foresters. So not fantastic growth rates, but quite acceptable. But the tubes are obviously another story. You're grazing sheep through them, and we quickly learnt that on the sweetest ground, your tubes would start to get knocked. And so the performance of tubes depends on the attractiveness of the ground to sheep. What we very quickly learnt is that you don't let sheep with lots of lice into those tubes because they'll rub them to pieces. Likewise, just before clipping time, and those yows are itchy with a heavy fleece and it's warm, not a good idea. But otherwise, it works. But you've got to be prepared, as we were, to go in annually and straighten up the tubes. It's a low-cost way, and the government will tell you it doesn't work. It does. 10% loss through sheep has been our experience, and that is largely because we've chosen stakes that have a big knot in them. If you can be bothered to do your bit of quality control, cut those stakes out, you'll have success. And I'm running out of time here. Next slide on, please. Animal health, animal welfare, closely linked. And it's worth bearing in mind that cattle evolved from creatures that look like this. They're comfortable in woodland, it meets their behavioral needs. Two questions were often asked about this. You can't see your animals. That's the design trick in making sure that you've designed the alleys and all the rest of it right. And it's your overall structural design that helps you see those animals. The other thing is flies. This type of approach to trees, in our experience, you don't have a problem with flies. It's not like field margin trees where the animals are trying to get under the trees. You get a muddy, puddled bit of ground, bad news, lots of flies. So in actual fact, pasture woodland from flies, in our experience, not a problem. Next slide. Get the trees above browse height. Make sure they're rigid enough that an agile lamb won't walk them over. And bark stripping has not been a problem for us, except on bird cherry. Bird cherry survives anything, even being completely girdled by a sheep. Next slide, please. We think there's great potential in this. It certainly suits us. It's part of our provenance story, if you like, that's going to differentiate our product from the low-priced, but what probably will be high-cost items coming our way into the marketplace. We just need to join forces with other people to get this provenance story out there. And if you're interested in trying it, go for it. Trees and animals have been together for a very long time. They're much more robust trees than you might give them credit for. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and obviously a very different perspective from Craig. Right, so over to our final speaker, Martin, who is the chair of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, but in his spare time, he is a farmer and a contractor from South Cambridgeshire.
So thank you very much. Yeah, so I farm half an hour up the road, arable farmer. We've moved away from a mixed farming system 20 years ago. But the last 5 years, rebuilding the regenerative system, putting the cover crops on, direct drilling. Last year, we introduced the livestock to manage the cover crops, looking how we can build back in and reduce our costs, our overheads, and our fossil fuel use. We've got to look at our businesses of the amount of fossil fuel, the carbon that is emitted, but also what can we store. And my mindset's been changed for a number of years now around how we manage our landscape. Next slide, please. We've done the biodiversity, we've done the stewardship, we've done all the other bits. So for the past, the main focus for most businesses is just about food production. And that's what the industry and the message says comes from farming. You know, we must increase food production. But actually, I'm a business. And for my priority is getting the best asset, the best value for the assets we have. I'm an asset manager, a land manager, and I will sweat those assets to get the best I can. And that would be food, biodiversity, it would be timber, fibre, any other product and service I can deliver for society. And the society's needs is changing. We're all focused around food, but what we need is to tackle our climate and biodiversity target. We need some public access, high quality food. And our food markets are changing also. And as we understand our soil and our landscape better, we can focus that. We can use the latest technology. We use GPS, soil sampling, GPS placement of products. And we've been actually able to reduce the impact we have on our environment, reduce those products, which is continually reducing our carbon footprint. I believe we need to work on a farm landscape across the whole of UK, and what we produce from it will change. Our marketplaces are changing, our trading conditions are changing, and we need to, as farmers, lead this change. Other people aren't going to come and tell us. Governments aren't going to offer us money for doing nothing, but we need to step up and deliver for society. Next one, please. So we need to focus on those natural assets and the natural capacity we have. All our landscapes and farms are different. I'm not here to say you have a perfect way to do it, but fitting the right livestock, doing the right thing, not damaging your timber, not poaching your ground up. How do we fit that pit in and fit those livestock systems in? And for many animal farmers, for sheep, I don't want to manage the blooming things, but I might get paid by somebody else who does. And we can actually help new entrants start up new businesses and how we can connect that produce to the wider community, how we grow our crops, how we have less impact, how we add in flower strips that increase pollination, increase in predatory insects. That on my farm we haven't used insecticides for nearly 9 years now because I see no benefit or reason to, because the landscape works. And all that landscape and that natural capital is capturing carbon all the time. Next slide, please. So for the network, you'll see on your chairs, we produce a net zero guide. It is just a guide and a starting point because we all must go on this journey. And actually, it's not about getting to net zero. We need to get sub-zero. The industry talks of net zero by 2040. For us to get reward and for future carbon prices, 5 to 10 years to get your business below net zero, and then we can trade that capacity in the middle. At the moment, it's fake trading. You can be the biggest carbon polluter and sell your carbon off from your cover crops or from anything else. If we're going to do this honestly and get the public and the industry on board, we need to adapt our businesses and get on with it. So there's some guides and some steps within the book. And it's not the Holy Bible, it's just some ideas of where we can all take steps, reduce our carbon emissions and get to a more thing. And how do we get our governments involved? Because they're setting policies over the next few years that either tie us in knots or give us the framework and the scaffolding to allow us to farm in a flexible way with some public funding support, private sector support through biodiversity and carbon that lets us get on and grow our businesses. Thank you. So the early steps, take that carbon audit. Yes, they're all different. Yes, they all come out with different answers. Do something to understand where your business is and then take those steps to take out that bigger carbon emitting, the artificial fertilisers, building on soil health, bringing in cover crops, organic materials while you can get hold of them. Because organic manures and compost are going to go rocket in price because actually the carbon emitting fertilisers we use will get carbon taxes and charges on. So if you can get hold of it now, get it while you can before the price goes up. Fertiliser, the artificials. We're going to get carbon charges in a few years' time. So anything that has a fossil fuel base is going to get expensive. So how do we wean ourselves off those and do different systems? How can you reduce your fuel and energy use? So as my business, we've cut our fuel use by 62% so far. My herbicide use, I think with this year, would be by 60%, fungicide by 40%. But getting the system right, getting our environment and our soils right, can greatly reduce our cost to our business. That allows me to produce a product at a lesser price. We can meet a market demand. We know our trading platform in a few years is going to get a lot more competitive. And we can trade those products to our consumers in a different way and connect what we produce in regenerative and nature-friendly farming systems to those consumers and hopefully get a smaller premium. Next slide. So look at that soil health and crop management. Can you have a wider rotation? This really short rotations aren't great, building up weed burdens that when we need to do an application of something. Widen that rotation, look at new opportunities for market. Manure and management storage. We're going to see a reduction of the opportunity to spread manures in the autumn because the crop won't need it. So how do we have those animals out in the landscape, not just in a shed and producing lots of manure? It's going to get complicated. There will be some funding support, but that will reduce our footprints tremendously. Next slide, please. So it's easy on us clayland farms, on the sandy soils, but the peatland, the upland's fairly easy, we need to wet it. The lowland is going to get a lot more complicated. As water rises, that peatland might become more flooded, but it needs to become wetter because that's a large carbon production. So the production that's on the fens, how will some of that fruit and veg and salad production move to other places across the UK? And there's new marketing opportunities of that smaller production. So certainly remove the fossil fuels, grow food, not feed. Half of our wheat we produce in the UK actually goes to feed animals, not people. So we don't need to produce more food. 44% of what the food the consumer has gets thrown away. The argument about producing more is not there. We need to think about that and actually what can we produce from our businesses and our landscape to deliver what society really needs. And actually we're going to come under a lot of pressure of this, just keep increasing food production. We have 2.5 times the land available across the globe to feed this population. And so we don't need to increase it, we need to be smarter in what we do with it. And paid and capturing carbon. There's so many different opportunities. Do you jump in now and get some money, or do you get your businesses right and plan and see the opportunities in a few years' time? Whatever way you go, Just be cautious and be careful, but get your businesses in place, get your natural capital, get your trees, your hedgerows, your cover crops, and do an assessment of what you've got and what you can deliver in the future. It's your asset, you manage it as farmers and land managers, so you may be able to sell natural capital in a few years' time to building developers and to other people because they need to deliver a product. Next slide, please. So regulation is really interesting. We need strong baseline regulation. We need enforcement. So those doing the worst things within our industry and within the landscape get a kick up the backside. And those are the rest of us that can improve. We can carry on. Marking instruments. We need clear labelling. Today, a number of organisations have launched Clear. And there's a campaign. We want clear labelling so the consumer and the supply chain can get behind what we're producing and the consumer can understand what we're doing. How can we support local food production? And it doesn't mean it has to be just next door, but that might be Gloucestershire cheese that's shipped over here and get the consumer to recognise that. So it doesn't just mean right next door, but within the region and the products with the lowest carbon footprint. And for me, I want to see farmers lead this way. I don't want to be led by governments and other people and manufacturers. Let's as farmers stand up and show the way what we can do and actually have a voice in championing what we can do and have a roadmap in the challenges we will face. And some of this is going to be really challenging. But if we can stand up and say this is the time we need to adapt, then we can do that and actually we can lead the way forward because we have the solutions in capturing carbon and capturing and delivering for biodiversity. And as land managers, we're going to, there's a huge opportunity. Thank you. I think that's the last one. Oh, no. Yes, I've covered most of that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Martin. Okay, well, we've got a good half an hour now for lots of questions. So I hope those three sort of brief talks have inspired you. You've got an opportunity to ask really practical questions. What's worked, what hasn't, what should I do first? As well as we could have a discussion about what we kind of want the government to do in terms of policy. So hands up. I don't think we've got any roving mics, so you'll have to shout.
Yeah, hi. Paul Morgan. I farm in West Wales. Beef and sheep up the farmer. For carbon capture and how do we sell it? There's a lot of people talking about it. How do you start? How do I start with it?
Well,
Martin or...
Well, Martin, do you want to give an English perspective? Andrew could give a Scottish perspective. Obviously, we sadly haven't got a Welsh perspective, but...
So you can now sell your carbon. There's various tools that will tell you roughly what you're capturing. It's about 50 pounds a tonne at the moment. But I'm very sceptical about getting involved too early because what is the market price and need? What are they actually measuring? And is it true measurement of what we're delivering? And a lot of them want long-term sort of deals to sign up. So get your business sorted out first before you rush to sell the carbon. And is it carbon you can sell or will you need it for your business in the future to deliver net zero? Because that's what we need to balance it off is what do we need to run our businesses? And then what is the opportunity? So there is opportunities, but I'm not going to tell you to rush out and jump involved yet. Get your business sorted first.
Andrew, do you want to give a perspective from Scotland?
Just to very much endorse that view. Watch out. Don't sell something you might need yourself in your own business. It could be you could be really damaging your own business. It's certainly in Scotland, but I think it'll happen in Wales too. It's a major driver of land use. It's starting to be, and we could lose all farming from above grade 3 land because of the amount of money that's looking for a home in this market.
I'll
just add one thing. We are hearing a number of industries now going out and buying farmland so you can buy a tree while you take your flight. There's a huge risk of taking farmers off the landscape. We want a working farmed landscape and farmers producing all the things. So let's show what we can do, but be careful where the market's going to take us.
Craig, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, we just approached it from, there's two things. One is, get to estate neutral first and then highlight the things that are the biggest offenders. So get to operations neutral second. So we've got some targets on how we'll do that. Let's learn how to solve the problem and then the market will open up. And we've just left it there at the moment. But it's certainly a good question. What do we want from land? And it doesn't just have to be farming wheat or barley. We can farm for carbon. It doesn't make us bad farmers. We're just using our asset differently. So that's how we're approaching it.
From a Woodland Trust perspective, I'd just say that with that land grabbing element to it, that's why we're really pushing agroforestry so that it's really working, the trees are working for your farming systems as well as that carbon capture and those nature benefits. And that's what we're really trying to push in terms of policy development so that we bridge that gap between agriculture here and forestry here and then the two never meet. And I think there's lots of opportunities on that sort of 70% of the farmed land area of the UK where that, agroforestry could be a win-win for farmers, nature and the climate if we get it right.
And is government listening to what Woodland Trust are telling them?
Well, I hope so. It's not just me, but yeah, I hope so. But it's a challenge because there's all sorts of questions within that about skills and advice and regulation, between forestry and agriculture. So we really want to see an integrated land management. So you've got all these different aspects that you're producing, whether it's food, carbon, nature, but that needs to be integrated so that your farming businesses are driving across that landscape and not being siloed and then pressurised from other sources. Over there, sir?
Just following on quickly from that, is there, if they are looking to try and do the higher ground to capture carbon, people are coming in and buying ground, would it not be slightly beneficial for us if there is a slight demand from the market to take small amounts of carbon from our own ground, not remove massive amounts, take small amounts just so that the bigger companies aren't coming in and just trying to completely infiltrate the market and overflow it?
Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an easy way of answering it. Let's keep the farmer at the heart of this. Let's show what we can, we want to have a farmed landscape. The rural economy and infrastructure will disappear if we see large landscape just forested. We need that built in. So let's demonstrate what we can do. Let's celebrate, and each farmer can show what they can do and market that.
That's what I mean, right? Rather than having these companies come in, there's going to be a market for it, and that people are going to be trying to get into the market, but by stupid prices if there is demand for carbon. If we can all slightly use the carbon that we've got in our ground, rather than letting the higher ground completely overflow the market, would that balance it more, maybe keep the higher land prices lower, and those sort of things?
Market demand and the pressures are so varied by different parties. There's not one solution, but we just got to get our act together.
And do we think government have got a role in getting that infrastructure in place, that framework in place, so that the carbon market is established in a fair and transparent way? Is that something that collectively we should be pushing for as policy is developed?
So I'd say yes. We don't have a framework. They're talking about carbon charging and international carbon charging tariffs. Food production is different in different parts of the world, and particularly if you put it on a plane or a boat, it has a different. So what are those standards? What are the matrix that we will have carbon tax in, but also the carbon labelling of systems around it. We need the government to step up and set that framework, so then we can deliver to that.
It's also worth just pointing out, we use Farm Carbon Calculator. I've been a fan. Becky Wilson's been brilliant, approachable, helps us. But there's still things that I don't understand. My crops are an emission of 30%, but my inputs, my pesticides are already accounted for. So I'd really like to understand that. We can evidence from, in the last 4 years, basically 4.1% to 5.2% organic matter increase. That sounds, that's a 1-point-something% increase. That sounds a bit too good to be true to me. So this one-off soil sample, which we can't actually agree what good soil looks like yet, because we've got 11 different soil types at Lockerbie. We can't really understand, there's 46 different carbon calculators. So until someone polices this differently, I'm not selling carbon. Actually, I'm just going to learn how to focus on, if carbon's the end goal, fine. On the way, we'll correct biodiversity, soil health, water, air, all the other stuff on the way. That's my job at the pointy end of it. This other stuff, I think, will come into place.
Who else would like to ask a question? Are we all jaded by the sun? Gentleman in the back.
Just on our farm, which was going on here, fertiliser use, are you assessing different types of fertiliser? Is there different calculations for that? And what do you see? Do you see some of that responsibility being on the manufacturers as well as us to manage that going forwards? Because that's obviously the biggest chunk of it on our farm.
Craig, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, so for us it was diversity and rotation. That was number one. We like I said, we went from 3 crop, dropped oilseed rape. We're not very good at growing it. 100% resistance to flea beetle. Some greed in the past of wheat rape. So that's ruined for us. So we dropped it. We were brave in the rotation early, so we've pushed it out to sort of 7 arable crops, integrate, the way we look at it is nothing goes through our cropping year without a shot in the arm for soil health. So that's either a pulse crop, oats, 125 kilos of nitrogen, Winter barley we grow, but it's now Maris Otter, so it's 80 kilos. Spring barley, 100 kilos, not the traditional 150. So we're using everything in our rotation. Foliar nitrogens to try and finish crops off. We're trialling things like taking crops to a base level and then finishing them off with something different. So yeah, it's overall fertiliser use, like I said, fiberphos, importing compost, muck for straw deal, all of those things that I've got available to me we're using. And we've gone from 410 tonnes down to about 260. And rotation.
My focus is to remove it. That's how we've got to get to. Only use it where we need to. How do we get the rotation, the soil health? We had some end sensing done. My cover crop held 125 kilos of nitrogen before we put the spring barley in. How much of that is available and when does it available to my spring barley? My worry is we're going to end up with feed barley rather than malting because the N would be available later in the season. The focus isn't just tinkering with the products we've got. We need to use them smarter, but we need to remove them out of the system somehow and look at a different system that we can use other things.
More questions? Gentleman here.
Question for Andrew. On the smaller cropped plots, the trees in the rows, do you find they help absorb moisture at all? Would it be beneficial to put this slightly damper parts of the farm if you're not looking at so much cropping in? Will it dry out the area slightly at all?
The answer is yes, it will. But there is an issue with trees and drains, and that's another topic, but yeah.
Yeah, there's some quite good evidence that trees will really improve the water infiltration rate. So, and there's been some work in, I think it's Northern Ireland, isn't it, where they've shown that with an acceptable water content level to allow stocking to not poach, you get an extra 5 weeks, I think, at the beginning of the season and 12 at the end, just because your your pasture is just much firmer.
So it all retains
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. Do we have any more questions? You're all very quiet.
For Andrew again. What's been the implications on your stocking rate of producing wool?
There hasn't been any, because when we did these stock exclusion blocks I was telling you about, we were moving to a rotational grazing system and we were really using the grass much more efficiently. We were changing a lot of things, and as often happens, so we didn't. It hasn't had that impact. We haven't had to make those changes. Clearly, it depends how you manage your stock, and every farm will be different. But you don't have to think automatically you have to reduce your stock. Look at your overall management.
Gentleman here.
A question for Craig, really, and he mentioned the sort of the scale he's farming at, and just not being able to take the risks that a smaller farmer could, such as fungicide, etc. And I can really see that, and I think that's the right decision. But as far as your rotation and how you're tackling pests and diseases rotationally, can you give us a bit of an insight into what changes you've incorporated into your rotation to reduce your reliance on carbon?
Yeah, so the changes in rotation have really been how we spacing everything out. So remove all seed rape was number one, because it was such a high risk crop, high input crop, and we just weren't seeing the returns from it. So fine, 2 tonne a hectare rape at £500 this season is a one-off. You know, my memory goes back to, not long ago when we're praying for rain in August, and so we just can't go there. It doesn't fit our farming principles. Looking at different land use, what do we want from land? If you just approach this as an economist, the best thing for us would be to put the whole place into solar panels. The second thing would be miscanthus. The third thing would be higher tier options. The fourth thing, from my net margin from our farm bench project, is about £440 a hectare. So the fourth best thing, just as an arable farmer, is to put arable crops in. Now, that's not obviously the answer, because we need to produce food and biodiversity and everything else, but we do have to be far more disciplined in how we look at our whole land use. So it's not just crops that we need to, how to answer this question is much bigger than just what crops we grow. I think the other thing is, like, we're a leaf demo farm, we're leaf mark accredited, so integrating some of those good old-fashioned IPM techniques of putting the right crop at the right place, at the right time, the right variety, I don't think we've done anything clever. We listened to NIAB tag, and they say X-Days has got a wheat variety called X-Days. It's got a really low response to fungicides, so we put on less fungicides. You know, this 3 weeks of rainfall was like gold dust to people who want to supply you fungicides. Actually, if you look at your own crops and you can't find disease, like, why are we putting it on? There's a weather station manufacturer down there who's got weather models that says right the way through to near the end of May, there was no threshold level to put on a fungicide. So it's just the best advice we've had at Lockley has come from Wildlife Trust, Leaf, Small Robot Company, other people. We've been looking at other people to get advice onto the farm, and that's been a breath of fresh air for us.
Can I just add a little bit on that? The next couple of years, we've got a area-based support payment. We've got the opportunity not to risk things, but try things knowing we got a payment. In a few years' time, that's not going to be there. So now is the time to try a tram line, try something, and see what happens. And you're not risking everything, but you're actually learning on your farm and bringing not just the normal advice you've received, it's the conservation groups, the NIABs, the alternative people that gives you a different thinking, because this is the problem. This is what's stopping us doing many things, trying to have the robustness in our thinking to let's give it a go. But don't go and risk the whole biscuits. But we can risk a tram line. We might risk an end of a field and might be surprised in what we see.
Gentleman over there. Sorry.
Can I ask a question to each of the panellists, please? And that is to get a crystal ball and look 10 years forward. And tell me what's happening on the farm and tell me what it looks like. And tell me what the main features are. And tell me whether you'll be there or not.
Very good question. Who wants to go first?
You pick.
All right. Well, Craig, you can go first.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, crystal ball. Well, the panacea would be organic no-till, but I've yet to see that working in sort of, you know, so that would be a possible panacea. So where would it be in 10 years' time? I think that dynamic, that mosaic across the landscape would change significantly. I think that we call it the kind of poisonous chessboard. You know, what my grandfather did 80, 70 plus years ago was produce food post-war. What my uncle's done on that farm was farm through high interest rates. What I get the benefit of farming with hindsight. I've got 10 different things to try and achieve in the next 35 years, God willing, that I've got to farm. So I think the mosaic of the whole landscape, the diversity of people and everything else that we've got into the farm, and just, I think that would be it for me. That's my crystal ball.
Andrew, how about you next?
You have to direct that question to my daughter, who will be looking after the place. No, I think, goodness me, I hope we're still here. And I think the land round about us will look very different. And I also think we'll probably have more diversification activities going on the farm.
Yeah, so a range of assets we're delivering of public goods, private goods, food products. We're going to have a lot more livestock on the farm. My field sizes are getting smaller. We're still keeping my father and grandfather made them big. We're keeping the shape. We're putting the diversity back into the field every 130 metres. We may have agroforestry, but I'm not sure about that yet, where it fits in. What's the size of the machines we're going to have in 10, 20 years' time? So why do I want to limit myself to a width? A lot of my products I want to sell locally and tell the message of how and why we're farming, why our soil is better, our biodiversity is better, and how that reflects in the products I sell. And we'll hopefully have a decent government system that allows us to have a framework and a trusted system that we can engage in. If not, I walk away from SFI and ELM and that, because I just want to get on with it. And sometimes the rule book's holding us back by jumping through hoops for small rewards.
Hope that's answered your question. Do you know where do you farm? And do you have an idea where your farm might be in 10 years' time?
Do a little bit of farming. I guess for me, I don't think I would be relying on the government to help me. I think Martin's last point about, when I came in, I heard somebody saying, we've got to get on with a few things. I definitely believe in that, do something rather than nothing. I just genuinely wouldn't build any kind of business case around any kind of government initiative. I just think there's far too much fiscal pressure in the system. And I think I would like to see the strength and the power back on the farm, which is why I think I absolutely applaud those that are getting on with some of these things now, because we absolutely have to take back control. We've had an analogue system, essentially, whereby we've had many intermediaries that had little or no value, and will increasingly add less value in a digital system. There has to be a better connection between the farmer and the consumer. So that would be my crystal ball.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience that'd like to feedback on that? Gentleman with glasses? That one, yeah, sorry.
So I work for DEFRA. I'm in the environmental land management team. So I work for the advice policy side of things. So just a question to anyone. How would you like to see advisors helping you 5 years, 10 years from now?
So I think that's a great question, because we've obviously been saying about just getting on with it now, and we know that policy is changing. So, how can they best help you guys set your own agendas and go on that journey? Martin, do you want to start this time?
The advice, not just from advisors, but farmer clusters, farmer knowledge. I learn more from coming to these events and understanding what other people have failed on and succeeded on. We want to do it on a landscape scale. So some of this biodiversity in marketing produce needs to be done clustering landscape. But I need so much information around what bugs do I need, what soil health is, what carbon targets. And if you give it to me all in advice, I'm going to get information overload. But if I can go to an event and have farmer bottom-up approach with the right support, that's where I'd see a good success.
But Martin, on that, obviously you're very involved with the network of doing that and that sort of peer-to-peer influence. Do you think that it would be right that the DEFRA scheme pays those farmers who are sort of sharing their experience? Is there a role for that within that?
The advice that makes business benefit to me, that's for me to cover some of the cost. If it's for the wider environmental benefit of other people, I need some support with that. And I really need to see support for that incentivising clustering. So that a lead advisor or support person bringing them together, how do you fund that person? And we can pay £1 or £2 a hectare because I'll see some business benefit from it. But there's the additionality that working together will deliver.
We have 3 schemes rolling out, obviously, piloting the existing things as I before. The second one, local nature recovery, I'm definitely a part of it on a great scale.
But your basic scheme, the SFI, that's going to start rolling out next year and step up, that is only currently available for PPS recipients currently. So at what point does everyone have an opportunity to get it? And how do I fit an SFI, which is a baseline standard that's coming, or options, into a local nature recovery? I sit on a lot of the DEFRA meetings. It is not clear, and we cannot communicate to people here how you plan your business in the next 5 and 10 years. And we need that information of what's it going to be like, and where does it move from a BPS recipient, because you're talking about farmers, to talking about land management plans, getting them to think about their assets, and developing their business to grow and develop.
Craig, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I actually like the challenge from Elms so far. I think you've got a basic, intermediate and high level, and we've aligned Lockley Estate to respond to all 3. We've got our 30 hectare rewilding area, which surrounds our special areas of conservation, right the way down to we'll be paid for stuff we're already doing. And we're part of a steering group for Walletbrook Farmers' 5,000 hectare catchment project. So we're aligned with all 3 because we knew this change was coming. I totally agree with Richard. We're not waiting. This isn't a replacement for BPS. We know exactly where the pinch points will be because we've planned it. But equally, using higher tier, we've turned a £13,000 a year mid-tier scheme into a £103,000 income. That goes a heck of a way. We've taken out our highest risk areas of land using my soil and soil data. So actually, I'm not relying on it, so I'm not totally engaged in it, but so far I actually applaud the way that DEFRA have made us think differently in the process.
Thank you. Question at the back, please. You might have to stand up and shout.
You alluded to the risk of what if we get tempted by a carbon payment and then find out, hang on, we've done our carbon assessment and we are an emitter, so we need to end up paying someone else to offset our own emissions. Yeah, are we effectively saying that we need to all get our farms to net sinks?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's much easier said than done. Like, it's an easy to put a PowerPoint together and say we tick all these boxes. It's not easy at all. And until you can trust the soil test, trust the calculators, understand the terminology, wean yourself off 30 years worth of inputs, accept total change in your mindset and all that stuff, it's not that easy. But I think the straight answer is yes, we have to get our businesses ready ASAP.
And does that go back to this earlier point about needing that advice and guidance? Because it's getting quite a messy market out there. Is that right? Well, there's lots of opportunities, or there would seem to be, but no clear boundaries or framework. And I think that's probably quite an urgent, and I think the government does have a role in that somewhere, just to sort of give it that framework.
And that's what I want from DEFRA, the rule book. Let's have a government that gives us a rule book and a framework, and I may accept some of your payments to do some outcomes, or from the private sector, or I'll just get on with it. And I struggle not to see that at the moment. We don't see that at the moment. And once we have a game plan, a rule book, as businesses, we can thrive on that.
Okay, lady here.
I'm a rarity and an interloper today, therefore I healthcare background. And it strikes me that what I'm seeing today are vanguards and fantastic farming. But I want to know, are you guys a rarity, perhaps as a sort of percentage of farms in the UK? How rare is it? And is everybody else moving fast enough in your direction? Is there a lot of resistance?
I think that's a really good question. And well, maybe Martin, do you want to take that first from your experience with the network? Sorry, yeah. Health, from representative of the health sector, and basically saying, she's been very impressed with the conversations and the general messaging of today, but are you guys a rarity in the farming sector? How big is the movement? Is it 20% of the farming sector or more or less?
So I'd say it's rapidly growing, farmers. Farmers who are slightly different, have been doing a bit of regenerative or a bit of something, have not felt proud to have their voice, stand up and be proud about it, because the rest of the industry push down sometimes. And actually have opportunities like the network and other organisations are giving space to be proud, opportunities to share information. So there is more produce being available, but we've got to get the supply chain on board, and we know a number of the supermarkets and the Nestle's and that are looking to purchase from regenerative farming systems because they recognise the food health benefits from it. But where do they jump and so they've got to talk about it to get us producers to get the volume that they need to meet their supply chains. So we've got to come from both ends, but it's definitely growing.
Yeah, and I think we need government to join up, don't we? I'm sort of excitedly waiting for Henry Dimbleby's National Food Strategy report, the second report, and I think, there's lots of opportunities to be able to convince Treasury that actually this is a really important sector to get the money, because it will have an impact on the health of society. We're nearly at 5 o'clock, so one last question anywhere? Yeah, sorry, yeah. Two. Well, do you want to go? There's another question at the back? Yes, and then I'll try and come to you.
Hi, it's Stephanie Grace. I'm from the United States. I also own a UK agricultural and informatics business. We've been working here on and off for the last 11 years, looking at how far we can push the farming system with alternative fertility treatments from synthetic fertilizers, and what we can do to essentially optimize fertility across the rotation. It strikes me that there's a huge opportunity to do some proposition for farm enterprise in becoming active or just the cost of production? Is that
Thank you. I think that's a really good point to end on. You know, we just celebrate the diversity that we have in British farming and look forward and say this is a really great, you know, we do have a good base to move forward on, and now, as you say, now is the time to do that. So yeah, I think thank you for that. So sadly that's the end. Just very quickly, thank you for coming. Nature Friendly Farming Network have a stand. They also have another session that's starting at 5:30 in the Old Dairy, led by Chris Clark, looking at the business and how nature can pay. Leaf have a demonstration, have a stand as well, and I have to say the Woodland Trust does as well. We're all next door to each other, so let's continue the conversation. But thank you very much.
Thank you.